Hello and welcome guys to another track guide, and today we have Watkins Glen in the LMP2. This is week 7 for the iRacing IMSA schedule. This is going to be the last LMP2 guide for the foreseeable future because we're going to be fully focusing on the GT3 Sprint series and also Porsche Cup for the upcoming track guides and setup building. So if you guys are interested in those setups, check the link down below. But for now, let's have a look at the Hotlap and the track guide. So now that we've had a look at the lap, let's have a look at the guide. So for the first corner, let's have a look at the left hand side, and we're looking for these braking boards. So we go past the 300, and just before we get to the 200, we then get on the brakes. So just before the 200 meter board. We're then turning in at around about this point. There isn't really a marker for it, but just get a feel for aiming to just clip this flat curb. So we'll see we trail off the brakes, down into second gear, and then we get onto the power just at the mid part of this curve. And as you can see, there's two levels to it, so this level's slightly higher. We want to just use this lower section to keep that aero nice and stable. Get on the power really nice and early and just unwind the steering wheel, and track limits are super lenient on this exit. As you can see, as long as you keep two wheels not crossing this line, it's still in track limits. Just be careful in the race, because if you over push this, usually it's a 1x, sometimes it's a slowdown. It just depends how far you go wide. Now going up the hill, we basically just want to keep the steering wheel as smooth as possible and just try not lose any momentum. How late and how hard you can turn really just depends on the track conditions, but just try and make sure you're not scrubbing off any speed unnecessarily. So now looking at the bus stop, this is probably the hardest section of the track. So let's have a look at the best way to do it. Now we want to look on the left hand side for the braking markers. Now there is a 200 meter board, a marshal post, and the start of this white thicker curb. This is about the braking reference, these 3 points. So use whichever one is most comfortable for you to use. Personally, I use the 200 meter board, but you could also use this because it keeps your eyes a bit more centered rather than looking slightly to the left. But if we use this as our braking marker, and then we want to basically get down into fourth gear, and with these newer curbs, you can see that we've got some anti-cut curbs on the inside. So we don't want to hit these because these will unsettle the car. So down into fourth gear, off the brakes, and just using a little bit of this smaller curb here. Now, still slightly on the brakes, just about 10% to keep it nice and stable. We can use a lot of this curb on the left, and just coast here at the mid part of the corner, and we want to let it drift out to the right a little bit to open up the final section. We'll see why in a second. As you see, the car is just drifting out wide because we've got no throttle or braking input. It's just coasting at the mid corner. Now we get onto the power at this point, which is, as you see, about a car length before the grass ends here. So now we get on the power. We actually avoid this curb because it unsettles this car quite a bit, and we're actually aiming for this one over to the right. But still, we want to apex around about this point on the left hand side. We're just not using that curb. we want to basically straight line this and put this curb in the middle of the car. As you see, 4 wheels over the white line, it's still valid as long as we don't go onto this grass on the right hand side. So use all the track available to you there, full throttle still, and let it drift out to about a car width before this line on the left. As you see, there's 2 lines of tarmac, and we want to be quite close to this left one, maybe just less than a car width to the left of it, as you see here. So full throttle on the entry, nice and wide over to the left, full throttle still, and there's a little escape road over to the right. We're looking here and aiming for that point. And now just before we get to this little light stand here, we want to lift off the throttle. Apply a little bit of brakes, around about 10% here. And as you see, just after we get past this escape road, this is kind of our apex point that then we want to get on the power once we pass that marker. So that is the marker that we're trying to aim to basically hit on this corner. And once we've hit that, we know that we should, unless it's really bad track conditions, we should be able to go full throttle, and then the car will end up on the exit curb here. Again, don't go past this line and it'll be valid. So don't go 4 wheels here. As long as you keep 2 wheels here, you will be valid. Obviously, if you are going 4 wheels over this, you're probably going to hit the wall. So I'd recommend making sure that you don't over push this exit. But it's a very rewarding corner when you get this right. You really just have to be patient with that mid corner. Just be patient for the throttle. Same with the bus stop, just be patient. Now the braking marker for this corner is usually this patch of concrete, but as you see in the LMP2, it's much earlier than that. We're going to get on the brakes here, which is about 3 or 4 car lengths before this concrete patch, but that is still the best braking marker to use. There isn't a Marshall post or anything like that on the right, so if you just get a visualization of where that concrete is, and we want to brake about 3 or 4 car lengths before it. Now down into 3rd gear, and we turn in before we get to this barrier. So before we get to that barrier, we should have already been turning into the corner. Into 3rd gear, trailing the brakes. This is a very downhill corner, so there's a lot of weight transfer. So we will want to be really careful with our braking and our throttle inputs. Now that we're off the brakes, again, just coasting for a second and then getting on the power. We get on the power before we can see the exit curb, but because of the downforce of this car, we know that we can still get some rotation. And use this exit curb that's available to you. Just be careful not to use too much of it because it's easy to pull yourself into the grass. Now going for this right-hander uphill hairpin. This is again very tricky for the load transfer, but it's the opposite of the last corner. We're going uphill and a tight corner instead of downhill and a tight corner. We brake between this 100-meter board and the 200-meter board, about halfway, so about 150 meters before the corner. We're braking in, and we're turning in just before this little change of the white line. We've got a direction change here. So just before that, we want to turn into the corner, down into 3rd gear, down into 2nd gear, and still on the brakes at this point, trailing the brakes really late into the corner, and then get onto the power. About maybe 70 to 60% of the way through the corner, we want to be getting back on the power because it is uphill. We want on the power early, and there's a little bit of extra tarmac on the left here, so make sure you're taking advantage of that and using all of the track available to you. Just be careful with your power application there because you are going uphill, especially on cold tires. The rear end can step out, but with this setup, it's very stable on the exit there. Now going into this right-hander, we're again looking to the left-hand side, and we're looking for these marker boards. So we go past the 200-meter board, and then we get on the brakes about halfway between the 200-meter board and the 100-meter board, so about 150-meter boards again. Now we're turning in before this grass opens up. As you see, it opens up here, so before we get to that point, we want to start turning in. Down into 2nd gear, and we're apexing just about round about halfway around the corner. And then we want to get onto the power and use this exit curb. Be cautious with this curb because it beaches the car slightly sometimes, but using it does give you a little bit extra time. So just be prepared that sometimes it's going to beach the car, but it will save itself. Now, for this left-hander, there's no braking marker. This is the point Luciano brakes on this lap. So just get a feel for where this marker is, if there's one of the trees that stand out to you particularly, or something like that. But there isn't an on-track marker. This is just the best point for the braking. So braking, slight uphill down into second gear, and then it starts to level out. Trail off the brakes, and then we want to get on the power now. Get onto the power, accelerate out the corner, and again there's a little bit of extra tarmac on the exit that we want to take advantage of, and a little curb there as well. So just make sure you're taking advantage of all the track available to you at Watkins. So for the last corner, we're turning in about halfway between the 200 and the 100 meter board. So about halfway, we turn into the corner, full throttle initially, and then just after we cross the line of the start of that curb on the left hand side, we lift off the power for a brief second and then get fully back on the power just to get a little bit extra rotation. And now we want to use this curb. The right wheel can go over this line, but be careful going too far over because it will beach and usually snaps on this curb if you beach the car over it. So try to just make sure you don't go too far. Bring it back over to the left here for the final corner to open it up. And we want to brake just after we pass this barrier or this board, whichever is an easier reference to use. But just after that, we want to get onto the brakes, down into fourth, then into third gear, and we turn in just as we cross this white pit entry line. So just as we cross that line, down into third gear, aim for the apex, and then get on the power just as we hit that apex curb. And make sure that, again, we're using all this curbing available to us on the exit. But that is it for the track guide, guys. As always, thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and see you again next time.